to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and this show marks the return after 2 years to the studio after doing this show remotely in our pajama bottoms and jackets from home. And today, as our special guest, we have Deputy Mayor Barrie Ward as our guest. Welcome, Barrie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Mike and Arif. Glad to be back.
Good to have you. And I guess we'll ask you right off the top, for the dozen or so people who may be watching here, what is the role of the deputy mayor, per se?
Barrie, I thought his question was going to be, are you in your pajama bottoms?
Well, we're going to ask that too, for sure. But the role of deputy mayor compared to with the role of the mayor, let's say, or a generic councillor, what are the particular duties of that deputy mayor?
Sure. Barrie's always had an acting mayor, and that rotated around the council chambers by month. The last term of council decided to change it for this term of council to have a deputy mayor, so one person would fill that job to provide some consistency, so it wasn't changing every month. So it's largely filling in when the mayor isn't available. That could be ceremonial events like openings of stores, maybe 60th anniversaries, that sort of thing. If the mayor can't make it, I can make it. Deputy and maybe it makes the people feel like they're getting something with the deputy mayor there as opposed to getting just a random councillor. The ward councillors are often invited to the events as well.
So at the start of council, at the start of your term of council, though, one of the things that you did, I imagine, is you set your strategic priorities for the term, and typically it's a 4-year term. That would have started in 2018 on the calendar year, I suppose, and a few years in, all of a sudden the world changed, and I'm curious. Obviously, there's a certain level of being in reaction mode, but of those priorities, kind of what changed, what were you able to maintain on in terms of focus and on course with? And now that you're going into 2022, have you sort of repositioned those for the year?
Yeah, I mean, we did have a reset of the priorities right before the pandemic hit, which probably wasn't the best time. I mean, it would have been great to do that reset after the pandemic hit, but we did it before. We did change our priorities a bit. But I guess the biggest thing about the pandemic is that it's been hard. I mean, staff has been really affected. They've been, a lot of staff their full-time job is handling what to do about the pandemic. So we're probably, it hasn't slowed down the city at all. We're still getting lots of building, an amazing amount of building. I'm often astounded how good the economy is. Our unemployment rate actually fell below 5% a couple of months ago. It's now still 5 point something, or it's still under the provincial and national rates. So the economy is going full. So the old business at City Hall hasn't stopped because of the pandemic.
Yeah, there are a number of positive things, as you mentioned, and we'll touch on some of them in a little more detail as we go. But off the top, there is something we're seeing in the news right now, just for clarity on it all. The issue, today it's reported it's going to go 25 degrees below zero. It was 11 degrees overnight. And we know we have people who are homeless in this town. And there was a temporary shelter built along Dunlop Street in the Sam Kinsella Park gazebo. That was taken down a couple days ago. That has not sat well with some people on social media, obviously. Could you maybe clarify a little bit for us about that issue there and just where the support it does come from for our homeless and we're out of the cold type programs?
Sure, and Barrie does not have a social services department. We had it 20 years ago, but then there was a realignment of duties. It was given to the Simcoe County. So they handle all social services. We pay them money and they look after the social services. Barrie. Social housing, they also look after land, ambulance, things like this. So we don't have a budget for social services. Mm-hmm. Having said that, the county's done a pretty good job. I mean, well in advance of the winter, they set up to have first of all, the city itself sets 3 warming shelters during the day. They're not funded, they're just places they say. If it's cold, people go to the places like the bus terminal and the library to stay warm. And the Busby Center is open during the day. Between 9 and 3, I believe it is. The county has also given money to the Busby Center to run a warming shelter for overnight from 10 p.m. to, I think, 6 or 7 a.m. They do have money. They've had trouble setting it up, I understand, and that's for a couple of reasons. One is finding volunteers because of COVID. People are just, maybe they can't volunteer or they're reluctant to volunteer, and also finding staff, the same reason. I mean, we haven't got a lot of people. They've had trouble finding people to fill those positions. They have to have, people at night have to be there. You can't just open the doors of a building and allow the people to come in. You have to have security, and it doesn't necessarily have to be people in security guards in uniforms. It has to have people who know how to diffuse situations, how to handle people that may be upset, that kind of thing. You can't just open the doors to a building and say, come on in, you'll have all kinds of problems.
Yeah, no, and that's fair. And I think the point of bringing the topic up, though, Barry, is I want to make sure that people are getting accurate information. It is tragic. It is unfortunate. It is minus 25. It's frigid out there. I wouldn't want to be out there myself. And we know that. I think what is important is that people at home appreciate and understand that there is a mechanism that's set up. It's not that the City of Barrie and its politicians and staff are blind or ignorant to it and have no heart. It is by design that each taxpayer in the City of Barrie, a portion of their taxes is earmarked and goes to the county for these services. So it is, I hate to use the word, but it is a little bit of misinformation out there that there is nothing set up by the City of Barrie to address these types of issues. They're there.
There are, and there is a warming shelter, and if people don't want to, there are people that don't want to use it for various reasons, but it is open. I mean, I want to make it clear, every single night there have been rooms available at the local hotel, which is designated. They are not being taken. The people that aren't going to them, for some reason, whatever the reasons are, do not want to live in a place with rules. Or maybe there's another reason. They do not want to live in the shelter, but there's lots of space available. We do need a warming shelter for people that refuse to go into the system. I think everybody agrees. And you're right about the cost. I mean, if City of Barrie funds it, we're double dipping in taxpayers. We're asking them to pay once to the county and then again to the City of Barrie. If I lived in Midhurst, I'd say, great. Barrie residents are going to pay for something that was designated a county service. I don't think we'd ask the county to chip in money for something that was in Barrie services. So, make the county might pay some money for Barrie buses or something like that. They're just not going to do it. I think in this case, there may be an argument to be made that we can do one-time funding to provide help the county provide another warming shelter. But I don't want to get into the whole thing of, we're going to top up the county services. I think it's important that we be very careful before we start throwing money at the county that we've already paid once.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's an appropriate question to ask you, Barry, but I will. And that is beyond what we contribute through our taxes that goes towards these services. What can an individual in Barrie who is concerned, who wants to do a little more, is there anything they can do by way of volunteer or donations? Is that a fair question for you?
Sure. There's all kinds of organizations out there that'll help. I mean, the Busby Center is always looking for donations. The Salvation Army is always looking for donations. They're always looking for volunteers. Mm-hmm. And certainly a lot of the people in our faith community have been very good about volunteering or helping out. I'd hesitate to ask people to do things on their own. I'd actually really encourage them to work through an organization, because often they may need things, but they may not need the things you think they need. Right. So I wouldn't rush out and say, I'm going to go out and collect coats for people this winter, because they may not need coats. I don't know if they do or not, but I'd find out that kind of thing before you spend a lot of time and energy, going around gathering things that the homeless may not need. There are things they need, but that might not be one of them. So I'd work with some of the existing some of the relief organizations that are already in place, find out what their needs are and help them.
Mm-hmm. It's funny you say that. We've heard it over and over again. We've had a number of events in our recent history, whether it's the 100 Little Avenue fire or if it's the recent tornado. And you're right. I mean, people go out and they put their heart in the right place, and they go out and they want to help. They can't stand the thought of not doing their part to help their neighbor. And then they go and collect a bunch of stuff. Storage is a big issue. And one of the things that we heard repeatedly was gift cards are fantastic because they don't take up a lot of space, but they have impact. And at the same time, those who are the recipient of that offering are able to go and select what's appropriate for themselves or their families. So I think that's great advice, and you're right. Definitely reach out to the organization and see how you can help before you go and take it upon yourself. So let's move along, though. We talked about what some of the priorities are and what some of the things have changed for 2022. I'm not going to say we've solved. We certainly haven't solved the housing availability crisis. But what else is on the radar?
Well, it's kind of an exciting time at Council, because there are 3 task force which are going to be reporting over the next month. In fact, one has already reported. The mayor reported at the first meeting of the year, and it was on housing, affordable housing, ways to find more affordable housing. And there's 2 more task forces to come. These are task forces made up of citizens of Barrie that have been working for the past year on strategies for 3 priorities. These are priorities we had in our strategic plan. And one of them was affordable housing, and the mayor is reporting on that. He led that task force. Councillor Jim Harris led another task force, which is on the Performing Arts Centre, and they're due to report in late January. and they will talk about what Barrie should be doing for a new performing arts center, probably on the site of the former Fisher Auditorium. The third task force, which was chaired by myself, has been dealing with creating a market at the site of the former bus terminal, or the current bus terminal. When the bus terminal is moving to Allendale at the end of this year, it will become a market. And more than a market, it will be a market precinct. So the entire area will be like the Byward Market in Ottawa, the St. Lawrence Market in Toronto. It'll be an area where small shops set up, specialty shops, maybe some craftspeople, that kind of thing. It'll be a place for people from Barrie to come together and a place for tourists to visit.
And all of it sounds promising, Barry. And on that, the first one that you mentioned there, which relates to housing, and as our show relates to housing, we'll focus on that first off. And that is, you know, you look in the news and it's been reported a number of times over the last year that Barrie is either the most expensive or in line to being the most expensive place to rent a property. We certainly know that housing purchase prices are going through the roof. But there are a number of projects, and it seems to be a growing number of projects that are either underway or being proposed to City Council. After the break that's coming up here, maybe we'll get into them specifically, but maybe in a general way, just to lead us up to that, tell us, are we seeing an increase in development of housing and how that's going to impact us going forward?
Yeah, I mean, there's always two kinds of housing: the new houses on the edge of Barrie and with the former Innisfil lands, and infill housing or high-rise projects elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And certainly, if you drive in the south end of Barrie, there's a lot of development taking place. And in fact, the last figures I saw, we were probably going to hit 1,000 new housing unit starts in 2021. I haven't seen the December figures yet, but that indicates it'll be one of the best years in Barrie's history in terms of new starts. I think it'll even be more. We've at council, we've been approving new subdivisions almost every few weeks. So I think we're going to see a boom in the south end. There's a lot of high-rise and infill development going on as well.
That is promising. And
that being said, though, I mean, I think we shouldn't get too carried away in the sense that something miraculous has happened. I mean, this has been in the works for a decade plus, obviously putting in the infrastructure in the south end. You know, I mean, hats off to those who are doing it. I'm sure that the development community is sighing relief in terms of the fact that they haven't had anything that they could do in the last decade. But I mean, it's great. It's great that it's happening. Obviously, we got to get on track towards the targets that have been set for the 10-year, you know, long-range plan, if you will. But is that also being impacted, and has the pace of it been moved forward based on the migration that we're seeing of people coming out of the GTA? And Barry, we, you know, put it this way, I love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's no secret that the pace of development has not kept pace with what we expected. I mean, there have not been as many housing units as we thought there would be, and I'm not sure why. Nobody seems to know why. I mean, even the pipes have been in the ground, they've been ready for development. The developer seems slow on getting it going, and I don't know what it is. And certainly in the past year and a half, they've been affected by supply chain issues like everybody else. You know, they probably had trouble. If you go to a store to try to buy as we've been doing, try to find a dishwasher, there's not a lot of variety out there. There is a serious problem, and so that would be one of the issues, is that that have slowed down the year and a half. So to say we've had 1,000 new housing starts in Barrie in the past year, it's actually pretty good considering the circumstances, and I think it will pick up in the next year. In fact, I'm confident it will, both of all kinds of development.
And I'll ask you to hold that thought there, Barry. We need to go to a break, and when we come back, let's go into that a little bit more about some of the specific projects that are underway or on the radar, and we'll be right back with Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV.
Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and we're joined by Deputy Mayor Barrie Ward. Glad you're here, Barry. We're talking about, at the moment, what's on the radar for 2022, and included in that is obviously sort of a status update on housing development. Housing affordability has been a considerable issue for a period of time, and it's good to hear that those around the council table and at all levels of government are really starting to embrace the idea of multiple ways to approach the issue, including increasing supply to sort of meet the demand. We're now seeing the greatest amount of new development starts in, I think you mentioned, Barrie's history, which is great. You're over, 1,000 starts?
I expect we'll be over 1,000 starts for last year, yes.
All right, terrific.
And I think it will build on that this year.
So, and in that, obviously, we've been years in the making. It seems like forever we've been talking about 2031 or 2032 in terms of projections. Now we're out to what, 2042, 2050 in terms of projections?
2051.
2051. Wow. And you mentioned that we're a little bit behind. Obviously, the pandemic has not helped. The price of materials is through the roof, so to speak, pun intended, I guess. But accessing and supply chain issues has certainly been a pinch point for everybody, including the development community. What are you anticipating seeing this year? Are we going to anticipate seeing a leveling off, or are they managing, or are we going to see housing starts continue?
Sure, nobody knows what's going to happen with interest rates, which I suspect will be the thing that determines what happens with housing starts the most. But if interest rates stay low, I suspect we'll see a lot more, even more than 1,000 new home starts in Barrie. A lot of those will be the new subdivisions in the south end. Some of it will be infill, and a lot of it will be high rises, mostly in the downtown area. We've certainly approved a lot of them, and I fully expect some of those will see a shovel in the ground beyond the two that we see right now, which is on Dunlop Street, the two that are under construction now.
Yeah, Barrie, just for clarification, obviously you've got the south end lands, which used to be farmland and are being redeveloped. Infill as a definition, and how does the city look at infill differently from the south end projects?
Well, both are important. The infill projects are largely things like people making second suites on their homes, or as we've controversially been dealing with, the second units in the backyards. We've had to adjust that a bit because there was certainly great uptake from the development community on those. Some of the neighbors were upset, so we've introduced various new rules about setbacks, etc., to try to ameliorate those a bit. There's other kinds of infill, which are small apartment buildings, which we're seeing a lot of. Mm-hmm. One of the recommendations of the mayor's task force was to allow those as a right on church lands, and we've already had quite good uptake from churches interested in building affordable housing on their lands. Part of the task force was also allow building as a right on commercial lands, appropriate commercial lands, which would mean Bayfield Street. You certainly, if you go past, for example, the Bayfield Mall, and it's the example they use in the mayor's report, it's got a huge parking lot, which is never full. I mean, maybe in the winter they use it for some of its snow storage, but otherwise that parking lot has a lot of places where you could potentially develop apartment buildings. Those wouldn't be small buildings. You could build easily a 15 or 20-story building on one of those parking lot lands along Bayfield Street. And that's hopefully, the mayor hopes to get that moving as well. It may not be affordable, but every bit of housing helps to overcome the housing crisis that we're having to Barrie these days.
Yes, and if you look along between Ann Street and the 400 Highway and Bell Farm Road, perhaps, between there and the 400, there's a lot of commercial land that I don't even know what percentage of it is utilized or is vacant, but certainly there are some former factory lands in Barrie and that could be repurposed for residential. Are we seeing that being at least studied, or are there plans in place for some of those? Like Bradford Street's another example where we have, lands. I know they need to be, soil reclamation needs to take place, but
that is part of the mayor's task force, and they made the recommendation. They've asked staff to come back on a very aggressive timetable within the next month or so with recommendations on how we can actually do that, how we can prompt the reuse of some of those lands from what is now commercial to residential.
Well, I'm glad that you bring that up.
Which way commercial's gone.
Yeah, Barrie, I'm glad that you bring that up. I mean, I think one of the definitions that we use, and it's not necessarily a commonly used word by everyday citizens, but it's highest and best use. And you can look back 20 years, and futurists have been predicting sort of the death of the mall, if you will, and that's the death of the mall as we knew it back then. That doesn't mean the death of the mall tomorrow, unless if we make appropriate changes and address that. So I'm glad that that's being discussed. I think Bayfield's long overdue. If you build it, and if you build housing over, and if you can underpin and do it appropriately, those residences would support the retailers below through groceries and other supplies. So I'm glad that that's on track. Is that actually a priority, or is that a topic of conversation?
Well, it is a priority to see, some of these projects go, especially rental housing. I mean, as we've seen the statistics, the average Ontario is 47% of all units are purpose-built rental. In Barrie, it's 27%, which is kind of astounding. That's largely because of the history. Barrie kind of developed from the time when people weren't building apartments. We've got a lot of catching up to do, but there's hope, because a lot of the units that have been proposed over the last 2 or 3 years have been apartments, rental apartments. They may not be affordable. Some of them will be affordable. Some of them won't be affordable. But I think it's important that we increase the market out there.
Can we just for the benefit of our viewers, we talk about the term affordable, and people are probably rolling their eyes. Oftentimes they're like, "Are you kidding me? That's not affordable." So what's the definition? That's an actual technical term that's being used.
It is. There's two definitions of affordable housing, and one of them is that if no more than 30% of the household income should go to the rent. And the other definition is that it, is at or below the level of the average rent in the city of Barrie, which isn't affordable for a lot of people. Yes. Actually, both the definitions are probably not affordable for a lot of people. But there's also another whole housing that's rent geared to income housing, that sort of thing, which is what the county does. And we need a lot of that as well, because there's people that will never be able to afford an apartment unless we give them a place. And that's one of the projects that's been coming forward to council, is on the former OPP station at the 400 and Bayfield Street. That will be county social housing, probably one tower and plus more townhouses. It's likely I think they proposed 140 units. The city of Barrie wants them to build more. We'd love to see a couple hundred units there.
Yeah, and that's well underway. I drove past that on my way into the studio this morning. I'd like to, in addition to that, I'd like to ask you about a few other properties that myself and others drive by and maybe asking themselves when and what's going to happen there. I'll just rattle a few off, and the first one would be the former YMCA property on, what street was that? Was that Grove Street?
Grove Street.
Grove Street, of course. There's development underway there or coming soon, is that right?
Hopefully. I mean, they've been diligently working at getting rid of the building that was on the site. So hopefully we'll see. Until I see a crane in the sky, I'm never confident that they're actually going to go ahead. But they seem to be. There's 3 or 4 towers there. Some of them are more than 20 stories. It's all rental.
And how many units are we talking about?
About 100 affordable units are designated. About 100 affordable units in that project.
That's significant.
And that's out of what, 700 is it of a total?
There's hundreds. Yeah, probably around there. I can't remember the exact amount, but yes.
And in addition to that, the HIP project on the old Barrie Central Collegiate lands, which is home to our rare chimney swifts for the last few years, but no shovels in the ground yet, other than clearing out the former school. Where are we at with that project? Is that coming along?
That's a good question, and we have approved a plan. But since that plan was approved, of course, the new YMCA is pulled out of that site. Mm-hmm. So they're going to undoubtedly come back, because there's a big empty space on the site now. They're undoubtedly going to come back with a new plan for that. It was planned for 2 20-story towers and a 10-story tower. Once again, all rental accommodation. Mm-hmm. I do not know what they're going to come back with, but they're going to almost for sure come back with something new, because
Barrie,
the Y is no longer on that
property. Hate to poke the bear, but I'm going to do it anyway. Any word on if any of these changes are anything to do with the revelation that that's where the safe consumption site was going to be as a neighbor?
That was certainly the reason given by HIP. I do not know why they pulled out.
Yeah, it's interesting, because they said in their original commentary that they've reconsidered, and that they, in light of the new information, they still remained committed to the project. So HIP's committed, but I guess is that the Y? We're speculating that that's why the Y pulled out.
The Y, they cut their agreement with the Y. I'm not sure why, and the Y doesn't know why they cut their agreement with them, but they did. And the Y, of course, is now looking at a site next to the Barrie Library, the H block.
At the H block,
and that looks interesting. So 2 more I'm going to throw at you quickly, or just a minute or so away from the break. The former Barrie Raceway lands, Osmington, I don't know if they're current owners, they were former owners of that property.
I believe they're still the owner.
They're still the owner, and there's been some development there, or progress, am I right?
They came forward with a bit of a proposal already once. I think staff was a bit disappointed in the density of it. They actually wanted more high rises, taller buildings closer to ESSA, and then taper down to townhouses closer to the existing built homes. I think they're going to come back with probably something that's a bit more ambitious than that one, including both commercial office buildings and still a lot of housing.
That's funny, because it's
that
usually
hasn't come back before council yet.
The battle usually works the other way, where the city's looking to to shrink the size of the project that's being proposed. This one, they're trying to get more units in there per hectare, I suppose.
I can see it, though. I mean, I can see the rationale behind it. Proximity to the 400, proximity to major arterials, basically public transit, I'm sure would have a hub inside there, or at least some form of connectivity through public transit and even mass transit. I don't know if I know that the GO train, the GO buses go past there. So interesting. But again, we are seeing in the last decade a lot more applications come forward where there's ground floor commercial or retail space with residential above and behind. So is that again part of this new streetscape of bringing development closer to the sidewalk, if you will?
Definitely. I mean, we want to sort of activate the street level is what the term is used. They want people to go by that and feel drawn to it, so that they're not facing a blank wall or facing maybe a fence where the houses are behind it. We want to activate the spaces on the street, which works for everybody. It makes the city feel alive. It makes people feel safer. So everybody's a winner.
And we'll wrap up this segment with one last project that came forward within the last few months, I believe, and that is, I consider it the co-op lands. It used to be the co-op store on Innisfil Road. It's a significant sized piece of land that meanders right down to Essa Road. What's happening there?
We've had our public meeting for it. We've not had a staff report on it yet. I expect that in the next few months, but it's a massive project. There's 6 buildings in all, up to 37 stories. And it would go right from Essa Road all the way over to the former co-op and up Jacobs Terrace. It's massive. I don't know what kind of format those would be. The people don't have to tell us when they're building it, whether it'll be condos or rental. It may be a combination. I don't know. There'll be some commercial as well on the street, especially on Essa Road. And it would be literally within a 5-minute walk of the GO train station. Yeah. So I think it's a very exciting project. And there's about 1,700 units, I think, in it, maybe 1,800.
So we are reshaping the landscape for tomorrow for the city. We do have to go to break real quick, but when we're back, let's pick that up some more and talk about some other advancements coming toward to the city, and also how has the Great Migration impacted sort of the rate of change as well as the investment in business and investing for business in the community in Barrie. We'll talk about that when we come back from the break on Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV Barrie, and once again we're with Deputy Mayor Barrie Ward. We're talking about the changing face of Barrie with a lot of new projects in the mix right now in terms of development. We were talking about infill in the last segment, and I want to pick up where we left off there, Barrie. And here's the thing: one of your roles obviously is guiding decision making in the city as those who operate in terms of staff levels, et cetera, help projects move along. But you're part of decision making and guidance, but it also includes PR, public relations with your electorate, as a deputy mayor, public relations with the entire electorate. And when you're doing infill, you can't help but be reshaping existing communities, some of which have been around for over a century before the city itself was incorporated. Now you're going to put up multiple towers on a city block that has been, for decades, smaller, detached, quiet community. You're going to change the shape and the face of that community. How does that work, and how do you deal with those who are truly not in favor of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, if everybody's not satisfied, that you've probably done your job, because planning's all about compromise. Remember, a planner once told me that many years ago. I've always remembered it. It's always about a compromise. I mean, we're not going to stop progress. We're not going to stop development. So for each individual development, you just have to try to take steps to make sure that it's not having a detrimental effect, as little of a detrimental effect as possible on the neighbor. I mean, people's concerns are often not reality. That's the thing. I mean, they're often talking about, this townhouse project will increase traffic in our area and make it unsafe. Well, it's just not true. I mean, our roads have lots of room for capacity. It's probably not going to be a problem. There are things they say, it's going to increase crime. Not a problem. First of all, it's not a planning issue, and it's not a problem. I mean, there's no in proof that certain units are going to increase the crime in an area. But there are things, like as a councillor, I do. If a development comes from my area and I think, can we move that access road a bit back? Can we move that garbage site a little bit away from the existing homes. We try to preserve those trees that are there. I mean, those are the kind of things that you can do. You can take little steps or do things, maybe chop a couple of floors off a building so that it fits in a bit better. But you can't stop them. I mean, people often think the cities approved that. Oh, we didn't get anything we wanted. No, well, often there's a lot of things done to that project to make it fit in a bit better with the neighborhood. But the residents didn't want the project at all, so they think they've lost. But
yeah. So here's the thing, though, Barrie. One of the challenges that I often faced, and I still face it when I'm throwing popcorn at the TV, is that, at a one side of our mouths, and you addressed it earlier. He said, you know what, if you bring the development close to the street and you activate it, was the term that you used in the last segment, and you make it feel alive and you bring more people out, it's safer. You do the same thing with the downtown. People are talking about rates of crime or feeling unsafe in the downtown. Well, if we had more towers and more capacity and more density and people basically down on the streets, it would be safer. So are you going to have more crime, or if you have more people out or more people watching each other's backs, neighborhood watch type of setup going on, are you not in fact making it safer? The stats would say for the city of Barrie, we are still the safest community, 5 out of 6 years in a row in the entire country. So you're right, you're not going to please everybody, but we also have a housing availability and affordability issue. If we create supply and we create availability, are we not addressing that issue? Which is it that we really want? Which side of our mouth are we speaking out of?
Yeah, I think there's another issue. Everybody in Barrie benefits if we have a good housing supply. I mean, if we want jobs here, if we want companies to move here, companies to expand here, we have to have a place for the people that work there to live. We have to attract that talent. They're not going to move to Barrie if they have no place to live. Or if they can't find workers. If you have, we've heard there's many things about, as a sort of example of it, of this resort areas, things like Collingwood and up in Muskoka. They can't find workers because the workers have no place to live. Often they have to provide a place for those workers to live. I mean, so it's very important. It's not just important for, it's important for everybody that our economy is healthy. And to have a healthy economy, we have to have a place for people to live.
Yeah.
So it's, so people have to realize that, and they've got to live somewhere, and they're not all going to live. I mean, people often say, why can't you build it on the edge of town? Well, first of all, it's not sustainable when you do that kind of single-family development on the edge of town. And also, it's not going to be less traffic. Those people are still going to be driving into Barrie to their jobs or to go shopping. I mean, if the people are living closer together, there's more of a chance they'll take public transit. There's more of a chance they'll walk to that store. So it actually means less traffic if you have denser communities.
Yeah, and with growth, there is an adjustment required of the residents, but there's also the infrastructure growth that is or will be required. I mean, we're projected to grow by 20,000, is it 20,000? No, 20 years, 200,000 people, I believe. You can correct me on the numbers there and the timelines, but it's significant growth over the next 20 years that we're slated to see. Are we going to have to make major adjustments to our roads in order to accommodate the added number of people that will be in Barrie and coming in and out of Barrie as we go forward?
Yes. I mean, pipes below the ground and roads above the ground, they will have to be expanded, probably not as much as some people think. I think we've sort of seen the one thing that's going to have the long-term effect of this pandemic is that more people are going to be working from home. Mm-hmm. I think there will be less cars on the road in the future. I mean, there'll be more cars because Barrie's going to grow, but I don't think we're going to see the same number of cars we would have seen 10 years ago or something like that. Well, people are spending more time at home.
We had Director of Planning, I believe is her title. I think it's actually kind of shifted, Michelle Banfield, on the show recently. Mm-hmm. And she did say, one of the things that we need to do is sort of temper expectations. It might have been that we have a 4-lane roadway and you could drive and hit every green light and make a left turn on your first opportunity at a light. And I don't remember the last time I got green lights all the way through. But the fact is that even as we grow, sitting at a light and waiting 2 cycles or maybe a 3rd cycle to make your left is not uncommon. And that was from someone who has an engineering and a planning background. So I don't know how that works at the ballot box, but I certainly think that she provided an ounce of sort of a reality check, if you will, and I think that that's what I'm hearing you say. The other thing, though, obviously, is that we do see in partnership with the provincial government, we are adjusting our interchanges to address the challenges and backlogs in terms of getting on and off the 400 series of highways. So I think this is all in tandem, is it? Or because there are some plans for Essa Road and Dunlop, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, I mean, that's beyond the city's hands. Those are all projects of the provincial government, but they have got a plan to gradually, and it doesn't seem to follow any kind of a time schedule. It seems to be sometimes they're advanced, sometimes they're delayed, but they have got a plan. Essa Road is the next interchange plan. And then after that would be Dunlop. People often think, and Dunlop is critical. I mean, it goes from 4 lanes to 2 lanes over the 400, which causes an incredible bottleneck.
Yeah.
But they can't expand that overpass, so they've expanded the other ones. For example, Ann Street has to be widened to create the ramp, which is being done now. The Ann Street Bridge is under construction as we speak, because it needs to build a new ramp to the Dunlop Street. That has to be done first. And same thing about the Sunnydale Bridge. It has to be replaced so they can widen the highway. Dunlop's coming, but unfortunately, it's not going to be the next one, or not even the next 2 or 3 that are done. It's going to be down the road, which is too bad. And I don't know the time schedule. I think they're talking in about the next 3 or 4 years. Wouldn't be surprised if that's delayed a bit. Mm-hmm. But they need to do the ones in order to build the ramps that lead to those.
Yeah. Did I hear you right? Ann Street is getting a ramp, on-off ramp?
No, Ann Street's not. No, I'm just saying the bridge is being done, but the bridge is being widened to accommodate the ramp to Dunlop Street.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So it had to be done first.
Okay. Yeah, so as we go forward, though,
and the off-ramp.
As we go forward, we're hearing at the federal level, and we're certainly hearing CMHC support the notion of taxing homes and sales that are over $1 million. And I often wonder, well, through whose lens are these people looking at, those who are creating these ideas, the legislation, the proposals, et cetera? The idea that a tax on homes over $1 million is universal across Canada, to me, is far-fetched. If you look at down in the GTA, you'd be hard-pressed to find a house that isn't $1 million. But my question is, well, what are the household incomes that are supporting those homes? They might have bought those homes when they were $100,000 and they're now $1 million. To tax that, you're taxing really the working poor, if you will, or the working average. Some people might not like my comment around working poor at $1 million, but they didn't buy $1 million home. They grew into $1 million home in many of those cases. Take that exact same standard, apply it here in Barrie, and what is $1 million? Well, again, those $1 million homes might have been $350,000 not so long ago, maybe 10 years ago. It's not people who are making huge 6-figure incomes that happen to buy $1 million homes. What does that mean for your residents that you represent as a councillor, and what the impact that will be on livelihoods, or the ability to, for those of us who grew up in this area, to acquire a home, and our averages are now approaching $800,000.
May I just interject there, just for some clarity, that this tax that's being proposed is a tax on the equity of a home that is over $1 million. So it's not a tax on purchasing the home, it's a tax on the equity.
It happens at the transaction, though. It happens at the transaction.
Mm-hmm.
So, thoughts on that, Barrie?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to have a major, first of all, I don't think it'll ever happen, but I don't think it would have a major effect, because as I understand it, it would be, for example, if your home was worth $1.2 million, you'd be taxed something like 1% on the $200,000, only the portion that's over the $1 million. Yeah. And the money would go to affordable housing. I mean, and it's only applied at the time you sold it. So when you sold your home for $1.2 million, $10,000 would be paid to the government.
And is that, though, a plan to help build affordable housing supply? And is that the plan? Is that part of what the mayor is thinking of?
That's what they're suggesting. Well, I'm not sure, but the suggestion from the group that did that study was that it would go to affordable housing. Certainly the city's affordable housing plan, it's talking about getting funding from 2 other sources. One from the community benefits program, which, so in other words, if you build a 20-story building where only 10 stories is allowed, you have to give a certain portion to the city, and it used to be under Section 37, bonusing. So you have to give money to the city. The other portion is from our community benefit funds, the benefit reserve the city has, which is money from our investment in Electra, our utilities. And those would be the 2 sources of the funding. We have not talked about using tax fund for affordable housing in Barrie.
Yeah,
Mike, you look like you have a question.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more skeptical on this, in that I think, in starting to tax home equity, even if it is just that amount over $1 million, it opens that door. And then what's the next progression from there is, well, we're going to have to tax all equity on all houses across Canada. And that is one area that's sacred, I think, to Canadians, is leaving the equity in the home That's money people put their hard work into over the years, building the equity in their homes. It's a cash cow for government if they can do it, but I think it's a third rail for any party that decides to bring that policy forward.
And that's why I think Barrie says he doesn't think it's ever going to see the light of day.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I agree. I think people, it's strange because I know in the States, you're allowed to deduct your mortgage payments, but you pay taxes when you sell your home. In Canada, it's reversed. We don't pay taxes when you sell your principal residence, but you don't get to deduct your mortgage payments. It's kind of a different system. I'm not sure which is better.
So Barrie, you've been doing this a while. You're in your 21st year, 22nd year?
Yes.
21st?
Entering 22nd, I got to tell you.
Okay, and so obviously you've seen a lot of change, though. You've seen the city go through a lot of cycles. I wanted to give you an opportunity to sort of, give us a summary on where you are, what you're seeing, and what you're anticipating, because you've been through a cycle once or twice before in the city.
Yeah, I mean, it's always exciting. I think it's exciting. I mean, just watching developments around Barrie, seeing new plans for things, it is exciting. It always takes longer in municipal politics to do things than you think it's going to take. It's 22 years. There's been projects that have been on the works for 22 years. You haven't asked me about the Allendale train station, thank God. But I always get asked about that. What's going on? And that's been 22 years ago. We were talking about redeveloping the Allendale train station. We're still talking about it. I mean, it takes so long to get things done in municipal government. And I mean, sometimes people say it's red tape. And it's partly red tape. It's also because there's a process we have to follow. We can't just go ahead and do things. We have to follow a process. And that's the frustrating thing about it. But I mean, go back to your question. It's, I guess I kind of learned to roll with the punches. And, things take a long time to happen. And you sort of take the victories, small victories when you can get them. And, the economy gets better, it gets worse. We've seen housing booms. We've seen housing stall. And in the end, it'll always work out, I hope.
Some good insights and some good advice for residents and for a few councillors too, in those words, Barrie. And we thank you very much for all your insights today and for all your information. It's always great to have you on the show, and we hope we do get to speak with you at a later point on Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. And thank you very much. We'll see you again soon. Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. We just wrapped up with Deputy Mayor Barrie Ward, and that was a great show. And Barrie always has some great insights, Arif. And one of the takeaways there for me was the amount of development that we are seeing and we're slated to see in the years ahead here and even the months ahead for the City of Barrie. And one of the things you touched on with that is we do tend to see resistance, and that's commonplace. And I mean, if a big project is coming up at the end of my street, it's quite possible I might have something to say about that. So I'm just curious about your thoughts. You did your time on City Council in the past. You've seen those deputations come forward from people when there is a new project. Where ideally should a city council or a city staff, not city staff, but a city council in general be positioning itself there? Yeah,
well, great question, and a lot to get out, obviously, there. Listen, Barrie is a great guest, but he's also a great counselor. He's a great politician. 21 years of wisdom there. He's one of the more progressive people. He's very steady. You can always count on him. He doesn't get phased. He's been through the cycles. And I think one of the things that is a takeaway for me is that, and I learned this from him, probably more so than any other counselor, is that it's who are you serving? Who are you responsible to? And it's not about getting emotional. At the same time, don't mistake that for not being empathetic.
Exactly.
The city is changing. The city is growing. We're not Barrie of 1980s. We're not even Barrie of 2000 anymore. We're in 2021, 22 right now. And we do have to grow to meet future demand. There's that balance. He called it compromise. I personally don't like the word. But it's about finding balance of what is best for the city, what are our needs, where do we need to go, which is why I touched on the fact that we keep saying out of one side of our mouth, we need more housing stock, we need housing availability, we need housing affordability. Well, if we don't actually let it be built, then that's not going to happen. If we want a walkable community, then we have to make it possible to be walked, which means, as Barrie pointed out, more density equals more people likely using public transit, therefore more opportunity to invest in public transit, or bike lanes and walkable neighborhoods, et cetera. And if you build the community where people congregate, there's likely going to be shops and services that are going to support that neighborhood. So I think Barrie's absolutely right on track in the sense that, he has to pay attention to what we need going forward. And so he'll negotiate, or council will work with the developer to say, you're not going to get everything you want, but you're going to get some of what you want, or maybe most of what you want, but, right? And then to the neighbors who are there, it's, listen, things are changing, but we hear you and we'll,
and growth does look different. I think back to, I moved back to Barrie in 2000. At that time, we were in the midst of a growth wave here in Barrie. It was different in the sense there was a lot of large tracts of land, big subdivisions, single detached homes on 40, 50-foot lots. That was the norm for development. And it really did not ruffle the feathers of neighbors right next door. There's a difference between that subdivision on that vacant tract of former farmland on the edge of town and that little tract of land that may have had 2 or 3 older houses taken down, and now you're seeing four stories going up there. But with that difference as well is, I think we've learned a lot over time in how to build the infrastructure, build for walkable streets, as you say, and bike paths and parks. We're doing things smarter now than we were there. Often those projects were built back then without that additional infrastructure being seen for years, if ever. So
yeah, well, one of the other areas where Barrie is quite correct, and it's funny because he was often referred to as the sage voice on council. If you look at some of the challenges that we face, they are based in infrastructure. They're based on capital. They're based on unsustainable levels of deficit and debt. Two very different words, but both with D and both not great. And that is, I mean, there's good investment that you pay off over time, but there's also operating in an upside down fashion. And to constantly build on the outskirts of town or on the edge of town, just forever build these single detached homes, it's not sustainable.
Spread.
Because the cost to replace that infrastructure in 20 years or 50 years is not sustainable.
Yeah.
So if we can have a healthy mix of multi-unit developments in the inner core, that'll allow to sort of get better use of our dollars, if you will. The other thing is, though, that the thing that I brought up last year, and I know we talked about it, was, well, how does COVID change that? Because now do we run into a challenge where nobody wants to live in communal housing, in a communal setting where we share elevators? And one has to believe that we're learning something about that in terms of filtration and ventilation, and how are we going to build multi-unit homes that will still address healthy airspace and living spaces, et cetera. So I think we're going to see more of that.
We will.
Over the next
and
10 years.
And I think with that, in existing infrastructure, existing homes within Barrie, given the price point of homes now, we are going to see more of a shift to people wanting to have that second suite and needing that second suite to have a secondary source of income to help offset the cost of the house. With that, you'll see those second suite. You're also going to, I think, see the return of what we've seen for centuries or for decades in Europe, and that is blended families, different generations living in the same household. That's not the norm in North America, but I think you watch over time, cost will be the pressure point for that. Will see us seeing more multi-generational families in the same house.
I'll pose a response to that. And what is the norm of a household in North America as we continue to see more immigration and more people come to Canada, and we see more blended families? And blended doesn't necessarily mean of multiple marriages, but it also means of multiple ethnicities living together. You might see the return of that lifestyle. The other thing is that while you might see second suites for supporting, in terms of having a tenant and supporting the cost of the mortgage or carrying the cost of the home, you might also see it from keeping people living at home, aging in place, as it were.
There's the term where we hear more and more, it's age in place.
Yeah, where you're not necessarily going to put mom or dad into long-term care at maybe $2,000 to $4,000 to $5,000 per month, but you save that outlay of money and you keep it in the home.
Yeah.
You might be bringing a PSW in for a few hours a day.
Or a family
something
member, or multiple seniors.
So as Mike, you brought in the initial question of this segment, which is, we can't please everybody, and we're seeing a lot of concern raised by neighbors when they see change. The reality is change is inevitable.
Yeah.
It is the only constant. It's never easy. All of these cliches from all the self-help books that you can possibly read, but we are going to continue to see change.
And we all need to adjust our expectations. Yes, for sure.
So predictions for you in terms of housing starts and turnovers? I mean, right now the inventory is really tight.
The inventory is tight. I think it's going to be another busy year this year, and I think you're, unfortunately or fortunately, whichever side of that transaction you're on, there will be competing offers. But I think the turning point for that is going to come at some point this year, predictably mid to late summer, when we do start to see interest rates go up. I think that will have a legitimate effect. I don't think it's going to stop the market. I don't think it's going to burst the bubble, as the media likes to say, but it's going to have a calming effect. And what I would like to see is more inventory, because I think it's the shortage of inventory, not just the excess number of buyers per se, but the inventory shortages that we have of homes for sale that is really making things difficult.
Mike, 21 months ago when I guess it's 21, almost 22 months ago when we started this pandemic, we started sort of pontificating and hypothesizing on what was going to happen. And one thing we knew for sure was that the borders were going to be closed and people weren't going to be taking their trips south of the border to visit a theme park or go to Europe or go on a cruise. And so we said, well, you know what? Why not invest in your home? Why not do a renovation? Why not take that money that you were going to spend outside and invest it in your home? Build your equity. Jump now while the prices are still good. Build a backyard oasis.
We said that?
A staycation. We did, actually.
And they
if
listened.
you go back, and it's amazing. The entire world listened. But you know what? It seems to me like we had our finger on the pulse there, and I'm glad that we did. Now, 2 years later, for some of us, renovations are done. Not all of us. Renovations are done.
We've had enough of them.
It's going to be a while before you might renovate again. So I'm glad that outlay of money is theoretically, for many, done. I think we are going to have to address household debt. I think we are going to have to address credit card debt and how we're going to live within our means. But to temper it, I think some of our spending's done.
Yes.
For some of us, the spending's done, and certainly with the price of materials the way they are, spending should be done. What do I predict in terms of that? I definitely think that people are going to reconsider their habits. I think they are going to appreciate what they have, but I am excited to see what happens next from the corporate side of things in terms of, does Barrie truly remain a place of interest for outside investment? Does Barrie look like a place where employers will start to invest and set up shop, maybe because land prices are cheaper still, theoretically, they have gone up. But I'm curious about how that's going to play. Does Barrie see a new wave of corporate investment? 30 seconds on your thoughts on that.
Short answer to that is yes, and longer answer is I think we have a whole show we can talk about that, and we'll bring in a good guest on that, because I think Barrie is going to be on the radar for business and for growth, consumer and commercial growth going forward for sure.
Well, Mike, I enjoy this new format. I hope you all at home enjoy this new format. It gave us more time to really unpack some thoughts and ideas and spend some more time with our guests. So I want to thank you for joining us again in 2022 on Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and we'll see you next week.